Oh man. All right. I had a good setup going for today. I was kind of excited about us trying out some new software that to screen share. And then as soon as I got it going, I got a nice notification that it wasn't working. So only works in testing, I guess. All good. Next time. I actually got a buddy of mine coming on next week. I think it'll be Tuesday, but I'll post it as a live video coming up. He was in the Army, worked in NATO, I believe. He's got a little YouTube channel, got a YouTube channel. And I think it'll be a lot of fun. We're going to talk Ukraine, talk NATO, kind of some of the stuff I'll get into here. But I thought it'd be fun to be able to kind of go back and forth with somebody on here as opposed to more trying to keep up with comments and stuff like that, right? So next Tuesday, I think he's coming on. That'll be a lot of fun. But a couple topics I had kind of lined up to get into today that have just kind of been on my mind, things I've been thinking about. Matthew, when are nukes coming? Hopefully not. But that's worth talking about. The first thing I wanted to get into is the Russian mobilization. Look, it happens. Countries have to mobilize for war. We have forever. It's only relatively recent that we've had professional militaries that go and fight wars on a nation's behalf, volunteer militaries. That's only relatively recent. But I've seen some commentary as of late that Russian not Russian conscripts, but those mobilized in Russia in the last few weeks have already been killed in Ukraine. I don't know if that's true. There's a lot. It's so hard to gather that information coming off the battlefield, right? Especially here in the middle of the United States. I'm not in the war zone. Hard to verify that stuff. But if that's true, if there are people that were pulled off the streets of Russia, young men and boys that were pulled off the streets of Russia and have already died in Ukraine, man, that's criminal. I don't care what side they're fighting for. You cannot train. You can barely give somebody the right equipment in a week's time. The idea that they somehow pulled, again, I don't know if those reports are accurate or if it was a one-off or whatever. I'm just saying if that was the case, Jesus, you can barely get somebody in the right uniform in a week's time. The idea that they're somehow integrated into the military, of course, in that time period, they have no training. Somebody could die because they don't know how to apply a tourniquet. Think about how sad that is. They don't even have time to train on how to stop the bleeding. They go off to the front and die a few days later. Again, for anybody just joining, I don't know if those stories are true of Russian mobilized troops ending up on the front lines and dying already. But there's a different setup there. If we'll keep using Russia as an example, in World War II, when Nazi Germany was storming across their country and they had to call men and women up, everybody had to fight, get there as fast as possible. There was no time to spare. They had to fight or the country could fall. So there's almost an understanding. It's a defensive war. Everybody has to be in, or it could be the end of the country. There wasn't a lot of time to run them through an ideal training scenario, an ideal outfitting, an ideal outfitting, correctly used this time, outfitting with their gear. Not like I said last time, talking about my daughter calling out outfits, but there wasn't a lot of time. There is time now because this is an offensive war. They don't have to push people up to the front in a matter of days. So we'll see if that ends up being an accurate report or not. I hope it's not, because that genuinely just makes me angry. It's not even a matter of giving them a chance to fight or this or that. Just the idea that anybody in this world can grab someone off the street and essentially send them to their death makes me very angry. So hopefully that's not the case. Sabin Rye, what's up, man? Hope you're doing well. Theo Wick, Sticks and Stones, World War III. That's attributed to Einstein, I think. What is that? I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones, something along those lines. A couple other items here, just kind of on that rant. The referendum results, it's kind of an interesting concept when you think about it, where even just a couple hundred years ago, we wouldn't have done this. We people would not have done referendums. It's kind of like a new age way of trying to legitimize taking territory, because people, we, the United States, all throughout history, we take territory from other people, right? Could you imagine anybody holding a referendum in the Western states after the U.S., captured some of that territory? For the longest time, you just took it and it was yours. So these referendums are kind of like a new age way of trying to legitimize something that's been done throughout history, right? The taking of territory is nothing new, but we're definitely in a period where it's frowned upon more and more. So these referendums that Russia held in Kherson, Kharkiv, Luhansk, and Donetsk, I believe, were the four. Anyways, the results coming out of those were like 97 to 99% in favor of joining the Russian Federation. And I don't think Elon Musk even chimed in on this one recently, didn't he? Saying hold the results with the UN paying attention or the UN overseeing it, and we'll see which way they vote. But you cannot. There's no legitimate way to actually hold those referendums right now. Maybe in, God, I don't know, pre-2014 maybe, but there's an active war being fought. Take out the risk of somebody voting against Zaporozhye, not instead of Kharkiv. Thank you, Mola Man. It didn't sound right when I said it. So Zaporozhye, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk. So even if you take out the immediate danger of, is somebody going to vote for staying a part of Ukraine while the people running the elections are Russian and they have weapons, take that risk out of it, which is like, it's impossible to discount. So many of the people that are in that area have fled. The ones that are more in favor of joining Russia could flee east into Russia. And there were these ballots sent, supposedly absentee ballots, kind of, if you will, sent to some of these folks that relocated to Russia. The ones that were more in favor of joining Ukraine fled west generally. Then, I guess I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming they were not sent absentee ballots. Probably a safe assumption. So you're not getting an actual representation of the people that are there. There's so many different factors that go into play to skew it. Of course, 99% of people probably wouldn't agree that it's good to breathe clean air. So the idea that 99% of people voted in favor of one thing that's rather controversial is probably not the accurate results. But it's an interesting thing to watch play out, because it's an attempt at a stamp of approval that I feel like even within some of the Russian circles, they have to know that that's not like truly the will of the people. It might be the will of a select group of people that remain and that voted, but I don't know. They went forward with it. They've been accepted into the Russian Federation. So trying to grab a couple comments here before we get moving. William McMahon, not 99%. I think one of them was 99%. I think it was 94 to 99%. Each one was different, but those were also the initial results. They 100% could have changed. Jim Wyatt coming in from San Antonio. What's up, man? Only made it down to San Antonio. No, we made it down a couple of times. We used to live in Austin, so we weren't too far away. It kind of leads into something else with Russia. And this is when the war kicked off, they said a lot of things. And like a lot of countries do when wars kick off, they made a lot of claims about Ukraine, talked about reasons for fighting, why this needed to happen. And personally, I thought, I am not a Ukraine historian or Russian historian. I got some friends that are super spun up on the history of the area, the Cold War, and how that's all played out. It's not me. Very general level understanding. So when Russia started making certain claims about Ukraine at the start of the conflict, I thought, okay, show it. You gotta prove this stuff. Just like when the U.S. went into Iraq in 2003 and said, hey, there's weapons of mass destruction in there. We never proved it. We I know there's some nuanced pieces there where there were some traces of this, that, or the other thing left over, but I think we can all agree that big picture, the weapons of mass destruction that were being talked about were not in Iraq, right? So I thought personally, Russia's making these big claims. They have said a lot of things before, but if they can prove those things, then so be it. And here we are, what, 7+ months into the conflict, and some of these things they've called out just are not coming to fruition. And it's like, I understand that there's a bias, there can be a bias in the media and what we see and what we hear, but I continue to talk to more and more people who are on the ground, reporters, journalists, people who, so if we, and I'm actually working on talking with some folks in the next couple of weeks. I'll see if I can do them on here in kind of a live setting to address the Nazi question in Ukraine, because I feel like that hasn't been taken head on as much as it could be, because it still gets thrown out a lot. And so I'd like to talk with a couple of people to really help kind of to knock that down and finish up that that's not as much of an issue as maybe it's presented to be. But if we focus on that, the question of Nazis in Ukraine, if it's a Nazi country and this is their way of life and this is what runs the government, do you know how many reporters and independent journalists have been through Ukraine and could make their career publishing that? Putting out the behind the scenes, who Zelensky really is, right? Or the secret Nazi cult inside of the Ukrainian military. Like, think of people, how much money would people make selling books, dispelling everything that our government has said, and the CNN and Fox and all those. Like, if that is there are people that are totally agnostic to this conflict. They don't care about Ukraine. They don't care about Russia, but they would love to just make a name for themselves if they could put together that story. And there's so many people in the country building stories right now. I feel like we would have seen part of it. It's that kind of stuff that, Russia's lost a lot of credibility, I think, on the military front. At this point, not living up to what a lot of us thought they could do. But some of these other claims, they're not showing evidence. And I don't know, it's not a good look. It's how do you come back from that? I think is going to be an interesting piece for probably all of us, because it's not going to be something that changes in the next 12 to 18 months. It's probably a decades type situation. Nick, people have published this info, Preston. If you could send it, man, I'd love to check it out. I've seen one-offs about Azov, for instance, having a hard time finding anything, solid reporting on the ground, more than we're talking about just a very small subset, which unfortunately is a factor around, it's an issue here in the United States. It's an issue in Russia, to be fair. So send it. I'm ready. I'll take. I've looked at the Vice News report. I've looked at a lot of the other stuff. It's, I don't know that it's not that it doesn't exist, but I don't know that it is the level that Russia's claiming to take on the global Nazi powers, if you will. That's not really come to fruition, in my opinion. But I do think it's worth getting into. Let me hit a couple questions here, and then looking at a couple of NATO items. Tim Caution, appreciate it, man. Nice of you to say. Albuquerque, New Mexico, Balloon Festival. Evans, I used to have my roommate. Oh God, what was his name? It's gonna bother me. A tall redheaded guy. I know that doesn't narrow it down, but he. Oh damn it, that's really gonna bother me. He was either my roommate or a squad mate my freshman year at West Point, and he ended up leaving. But I remember the thing. He always talked to Brookshire, I think was his name. He was like a balloon guy in New Mexico. And they used to, or I don't know if he lived down there or he used to just go do it, but like he was showing us these pictures. I had no idea. It's a huge thing. It's crazy how big that is. Matthew, most documented conflict to date. 100%, man. That's another one of these things that's it's every so often. I don't know what the goal of this comment is, but I'll hear people say that. What's the line? They say, "Why is there no footage coming out of this war?" I don't know if they're being serious or not, but there is a shocking amount of footage. And as soon as you think you've seen everything, you realize that it's really a very, very small percentage. Third LAR. That's awesome, man. Do you believe NATO would join the war? I want to get into that right here. So, a couple items with NATO. Ukraine. So Ukraine, to my knowledge, had never formally applied to NATO in the past. It had been made pretty clear by NATO members that they would not be accepted. So Ukraine just didn't push that forward. I could be wrong, but I am 99% certain they never formally applied until this last week when they sent their application in, and with that asked for it to be expedited, just because it takes a while. My belief is that won't be accepted anytime soon. I think so. Every NATO member has to agree on a new country joining NATO, and I don't think that's. I don't think every NATO country is. Even if the war was not going on right now with Russia, I don't think that every NATO member would agree on Ukraine joining, mostly because it's a very contentious subject with Russia. The NATO Secretary General, I think earlier this year, said that Russia will not be able to veto their application. Russia does not have say over who does and does not join NATO, but you have to take into consideration the global impact and the impact of, that's what comes up when anybody joins NATO, is what's going to be the impact and how is this felt around the world. And I just think there's got to be at least a couple countries in NATO right now that are probably not ready to rock the boat that much. One man's opinion. There probably are some countries that are ready to go, but it doesn't matter. You have to have everybody on board. I saw a couple comments. Turkey, for 100%. Turkey just likes stirring up trouble in NATO right now. Joking a little bit, but I find it hard to believe that Turkey would be on board. Germany right now, I don't know that there's domestic support in Germany to, allow Ukraine into NATO. So personally, I don't think Ukraine is going to be joining NATO in the near term. But there are some other kind of, I want to say myth. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. There's a common saying that you cannot join NATO while there's a border dispute or there's an open conflict. And if you look at the NATO charter, that's not going to stop Ukraine from joining. So if you look at all the comments from the different NATO countries that are either for or against, they never mention it's against the rules, so they can't. If anybody was even a little bit on the fence, you'd think the first thing they would say is, hey, look, we love Ukraine. We just can't because they're in an open conflict and rules are rules, right? Wouldn't that be one of the first things? That's the first thing I'd throw out there if I was against it. But when you look at actual government responses, those things are never referenced because it's not an actual law of NATO. It's a norm. It's obviously a very serious thing to overcome because of the Article 5 protections. An attack on one is an attack on all. So inviting in a country that's in a current conflict at the very least is spicy, right? And you got to start debates right away. Is all of NATO at war? So Ukraine technically doesn't have any. And the other part with joining NATO is there's all of these kind of norms and historic pieces to it, but really all it comes down to is if all the countries agree. So people have said they're not democratic enough, or there's too much corruption, or they're whatever. It really doesn't matter. If every country in NATO says we'll have them, then that's the rule. The last thing I think worth hitting on here has to do with Article 5. Bad boy, can you get that hat? Dude, I had to up my hat game. My rogue hats were getting pretty beat up. And they're really good ones, but I had my wife do some shopping for me. She does all the shopping. So got a good Noble hat now. It's too expensive to buy any of the other stuff. Their shorts and shirts stuff are all super expensive, but I can handle a hat. Article 5 with NATO, I think, is worth talking about. Fat Boy Noble. It's like a fitness brand kind of thing. Clothing. They have clothing. Article 5 of NATO is kind of like the bread and butter of NATO. An attack on one is an attack on all. And I think that we extrapolate that out to a point where it doesn't really apply. What I mean is, let's say tomorrow Germany got attacked by I don't know who. Germany gets attacked. They're a NATO member. That does not automatically mean that the United States is mobilized and goes to war. It means that Germany can ask for NATO support, and it means that according to this treaty, the United States and the rest of NATO members can support them in line with that treaty. But if the U.S. says we're not going to fight this fight, they don't have NATO does not have control over the U.S. forces. It would make the North Atlantic Treaty Organization look pretty weak if there was a major attack and any number of countries decided we're not going to do this. But just because there's an attack on a NATO country does not automatically mean that nukes start flying from the United States. So there is still a process there. And technically, at any point, the U.S., even right now, if Russia were to attack Poland, the NATO member, that is not an automatic go to war with Russia, all of NATO. Technically, every country, they have the ability to participate or not participate. So I thought that was worth bringing up. UA Shava, what's up, man? What's going on? Can a country choose to help Ukraine without involving NATO? I wonder how that would play out. Do you mean like troops on the ground? I think maybe. But at this point, I think, in my opinion, the gateway into Ukraine is NATO right now. You're essentially having to go through a NATO country to get there, with so many supplies and money and resources coming through NATO countries. I feel like any country X that decides they want to put troops on the ground in support of Ukraine, I feel like the negotiating piece would partially be with NATO. So I don't know they could get around that, but I guess technically that's interesting. Decline, Ukrainians need you on the front line and stream your videos live. I chatted with some folks got an invite recently to go over to Ukraine. It's back in my mind, honestly. I interviewed a guy, that's disrespectful for who he is. Major General John Ron. He was a Ranger Company commander on D-Day. And he was at West Point when Pearl Harbor kicked off. And he was talking about when the war started in 1939, there were West Point cadets who, on their summer break, went over to Europe to kind of sightsee because this war was starting, and they thought the U.S. wasn't involved, and they kind of got to see like Europe at war in the early stages. And that's always been in my mind, is if this is really something that's starting to ramp up, decades from now, I'll look back and I don't know, will I wish that I went there and saw what it was like and kind of got the not hands-on experience, but got to meet some of the people firsthand, I guess is what I'd say. Walk some of the battlefields. I don't know. My, full disclosure, my hang up is twofold. One, I'm still a member of the Department of Defense here, albeit in the reserve status. I don't know if that would cause any issues or not, but there's a reason I never wear my uniform during these videos and things like that. I'm very hesitant to ever make something look like I'm representing the U.S. military. So there's that. And the other part, honestly, my number one priority above anything else is my family here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And as we started laying out what it would look like to go to Ukraine for a period of time, I just thought how stupid I would feel if something happened to me. It's a war zone, right? So there's a higher likelihood that something happens there than in Middle Tennessee. I thought, that's not, they need me here. My family needs me here. So I don't know that I could justify that, but it's on my mind, something I've thought about a lot. But end of the day, family's got a strong pull. Family's supporting for what it's worth. It was not their call. They're not the ones that said that. It's just kind of the feeling. Jaron, Afghan National Army paper in the background. Jay Moore, Murfreesboro. What's up, man? Let's see. This is I'm moving my office, kind of. This is moving down the hallway, so I think this is the last one in here. Get a little better setup, hopefully. But this is 2012. You hold it up here. I don't know how well that's gonna. 2012, Afghan National Army. We were training their field artillery units, kind of standing up their artillery in eastern Afghanistan, Laghman province. And when we left, the brigade commander that we were working with gave us all these little certificates. That one's like too small to put on the wall, so I've always had it in this little frame because I don't want to lose it. I think it's nice. It was a nice gesture on their part, and I just never had a good spot to put it, so it always ends up like on a shelf. And right now it's there. It's like, it kind of makes it look like it's the primary thing, but all good. Yeah, really like that. Kevin, the comment from General Petraeus' speech the other day. I don't know if I've seen the full thing. It wouldn't be fair to comment. If I'm not mistaken, that was the one kind of referencing what would happen if Putin used nukes, but that's the most I've seen on it. So I'd have to look into it before I say much there. James, Nashville. That's awesome, man. We moved back here because we missed kind of Middle Tennessee. I was stationed at Fort Campbell when I was on active. My wife was in school at Kentucky, University of Kentucky. And we moved around a little bit. I lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan briefly, Chicago briefly, down in Austin, Texas for a little bit. We bounced. And when we had the chance to move wherever we wanted, we came back to Middle Tennessee because we just really liked this area. Murfreesboro is a good family home. Jaron, we'll see you, man. Next to none. Yeah, my North Korea, dude. North Korea has launched probably 25 missiles this year. It's sneakily like goes under the radar because they keep doing it. And I just finished up a video. I haven't put it up yet, where it's essentially like, what the heck is happening here? Because it's been this constant stream of no progress for what now? Like 8-10 years since Kim Jong-un's been in power. He's ramped up his missile strikes. He's ramped missile tests, I guess we'll call them. He's ramped up the nuclear tests. It's insane. And I don't know what the plan is. I don't know what they're aiming for. They are under a lot of sanctions. They suffer. Their citizens every single day feel the impact of the international sanctions and the United States sanctions on their country. 100%. We do not. I can't imagine a single American wakes up and thinks about, or I shouldn't say that. I'm sure there's very few people that wake up in the United States and think about the sanctions and the impact they're having on North Korea. All right. So it's a 10 for them. It's a 0 for us. I got that. But these random like shows of force, I don't know what they're trying to get at. I don't know what the goal is. They just today sent bombers and fighters down near the South Korean border. I haven't seen the last time that was done, but it was a while ago. South Korea had to scramble jets to be ready, I think is the right term. The U.S. sent another carrier, sent the Ronald Reagan, I think, carrier strike group back into the Sea of Japan. Like, what are we doing here? What are we trying to get out of this? North Korea today, October 6, 2022, cannot count on Russia. China has kind of got their own stuff going on. What is Kim Jong-un doing? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Florian, appreciate that, man. Germany. Love that. Try to catch up on a couple comments here, guys. Thoughts on tactical nuclear moves from Putin? Tom, I think we'd see a demo first, perhaps in the sea. Tom Roberts, yeah, Tom, I think we would see some sort of demonstration first. I think there's a lot of things that could be done before a nuclear device is actually used to take lives. So it could be, so there's all these different things we monitor on the nuclear spectrum, if you will. We monitor movement to and from launch sites. We, the international intelligence community, you monitor increased activity at certain, missile silos, whatever it is. So to me, there's all of these different steps that could be taken by Putin to show, hey, we're getting there. Like it would be odd for a nuclear strike to happen in Ukraine tomorrow. Like there's all of these different steps he could take to kind of slowly ratchet it up that are still in the deck. May have seen one with some of the movement around one of the, Directorate 12, I think is the term. The forces around controlling and using the nuclear weapons. But yes, long story short, I do think the first thing we would see a test before anything else, in my personal opinion, because you might be able to get what you need out of doing that. And then you can always write that off as it was just a test. Most countries have dialed back their tests in recent time, but you can see how that's kind of a middle ground. He didn't actually use a nuke, but he showed the nuke. So I think you'd probably see one of those. Probably, I don't know if it'd be out at sea. I don't know what Russia's been doing. I think Russia's nuclear tests are more in the northeast of the country, like the opposite of Ukraine, but we'll see. I still think we've got a little ways to go before we get there, to be honest. You think China will go to war with Taiwan? Next to none. I think your questions are popping at the top or something. I think China will make a move to incorporate Taiwan into Greater China sometime in the next 10 years. I don't know what that'll look like. I read a good article recently. I think I shared it here. Actually shared it on the community tab on YouTube. It's worth checking out. I didn't write it, but it was all about the different signs that we could pick up on people, the signs we could pick up on that would suggest China is readying some sort of move against Taiwan. And in that, they pointed out that a military invasion probably is not the first step. And there's a lot of other things they could do to, incorporate Taiwan into China. Blockades, sanctions, economic warfare, electronic warfare. It's not a guarantee that, I think the last I heard was by 2027 is the plan to be ready to take Taiwan. I don't know how accurate that is, but that might not mean landing craft and cruise missiles and bombers and fighters. It could be something a little more, little green men in Eastern Ukraine and Crimea, 2014, right? That little green men situation that the Russians did, that worked. That was pretty effective. And it kind of, if you think about it, from 2014 to 22, the world pretty much just accepted that Russia was now the owner of Ukraine and portions of Eastern Ukraine. The world just kind of got on with it, which is why I think, or at least I was surprised that they actually drove across the border in tanks, because it seemed like they had been successful in this kind of under the radar warfare. It wouldn't be crazy to see China do something similar to that, because Russia didn't pay all that much from what they did by taking those territories back in 2014. I saw a comment about Armenia earlier. I got to keep up with that a little better. It died off pretty quickly there. In a good way. It seems like the fighting escalated and then stopped. That ceasefire that nobody thought was going to hold actually held. But I need to dive back into that. There we go. Fosty player watching from Armenia. Your father's being sent to the front lines. I hope your father stays safe, man. that's not getting a lot of attention right now. And that's one that I think, to the detriment of probably Armenians, it's not an easily understood conflict. I posted a few videos about it and got honest to God comments that said, who are the good guys and whose side are we on, kind of thing, because it's complicated. And I fortunately the US has had some interactions recently with Armenia, but Armenia's in a tough spot, man. Banking on, kind of, from my understanding, not happy about being tied to Russia, maybe is the way to put it. But because of that, because of that, folks have planted them in the Russia camp, when I don't think that's very accurate from the Armenians I've talked to. So it's hopefully peace soon, that's for sure. Jake Rose, what do you think about Elon Musk's tweet? Yeah, so man, I'll tell you what, Jake, I had this great setup where I could share my screen and talk back and forth and show you what I was looking at. And then when I hit go live at 12 o'clock, the thing stopped working. So I am going to figure that out, but it's for situations just like this to actually show it. So Elon Musk, let me pull it up so I actually get this correct. Offered a proposal for Ukraine-Russia peace. He said, redo elections of annexed regions under UN supervision. Russia leaves if that is the will of the people. Crimea formally part of Russia as it has been since 1783 until Khrushchev's mistake. Water supply to Crimea assured. Ukraine remains neutral. And he put out this poll and it got 2.7 million votes and he got hammered, man. The results on that were, so 59% said no, 40% said yes. People came out just hammering Musk. I don't know. I'm all for any proposals to end a war. You don't have to accept the proposals, but if this starts a conversation, cool. I think that's good. I think there's far too many cases in this conflict, we'll just leave it at that, where there's, we're never going to surrender, we're never going to negotiate. Like, no. If we can just keep the lines of communication open, just keep talking. Yeah, this was random from Musk. I didn't expect him to throw this out there. I think I haven't kept up with everything he said. I want to say he said he spoke with Putin as well. It's not a yes/no question is the problem, and there's more complexity here than you can put in a simple vote. So Iron Tiger, what's up, man? Like, the idea of redoing elections of annexed regions, we talked about that right at the beginning of the stream. Like, all right, you got to find everybody who has lived in that region over the last, 8 years, 10 years? They all get to vote. Are they all going to vote? Even maybe if you could capture everybody who's lived in those regions over the last 10 years and they all got to vote, maybe that would be close to accurate. That sounds like a nightmare to actually pull off. What about people that moved into those territories in the last couple of years because it was more? What about the people that moved into the LPR after the Russian separatists took over? Do they get a vote, right? Like, that skews the results. I don't know. Fine. Again, if it starts the conversation, then I'm in favor, I think is the best way to say it. Cue ball negotiations for Ukraine would mean giving up states in their country. We wouldn't do that. Yeah, I agree. Well, I don't think I can say entirely I would agree. I think it would depend, and it would depend on what the alternative is. So the dang wild card here is Russia's nuclear weapons. They didn't have those. This seems like it'd be a much easier conversation, a much easier way to find peace. But I don't think we could say never. I think in certain situations, if the alternative was a global nuclear war, then we might give some territory back to Mexico, right? I don't know. It's impossible to feel what the people of Ukraine are feeling with some of their territory being taken. That's the challenge of throwing out ideas like this when we're not actually there and don't have the emotional and historical buy-in to it, right? Like, it means it's going to come across harshly, but like it doesn't impact me emotionally if Ukraine were to gain or lose chunks of their historic territory, right? But if we started slicing off chunks of the United States, I'd be very emotionally impacted. So hard to speak on their behalf, I think. JT, first mistake was letting Russia get away with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. I think it's interesting looking back now, right? And that's what I was just saying, how when the war in those weeks and months before the war kicked off, and I mean, I'm far from like a professional military analyst, just a guy who talks online sometimes, but I thought there's no way Russia's actually going to do this. Like, they were successful in Crimea. They were successful in Luhansk and the Donbass. Like, why change the game that much? They didn't really pay. I mean, there were some sanctions against Russia, but not enough to change anything for sure, right? I thought this is one of the challenging pieces to comment on, because there are things our adversaries do. Speaking as an American citizen, there are things our adversaries do better than us. And there's things that our adversaries do that I think we can learn from. And the Russian use of little green men, which I keep saying that, but these were, like, everybody kind of knew these were Russian soldiers, members of the Russian military, and they just showed up kind of overnight in some areas that were contested and had some Russian supporters, excuse me, and were able to seize this territory. And there's this level of deniability by Russia, because these guys, they weren't wearing flags on their shoulders, and so they're not ours. And it was just hard enough to prove without any doubt that they were Russian, to where everybody kind of knew who it was, but we couldn't prove it really. So it was pretty effective. And I don't know if that's a tactic the U.S. would use down the road, but something to learn from, right? Thank the EU for ignoring the little green men and arguing against anti-terror operations support to Ukraine. Yeah, I don't know. I am guilty of. I knew because I like military history, I did know where Ukraine was on a map. So I'm familiar with some of their experiences pre-World War II, into the war, and shortly thereafter, and a little bit in the Cold War. But admittedly, 2014, like I remember that happening in 2014, but the process from 14 to 22, I didn't spend a lot of time reading about it, studying it, keeping up with it at all. The most kind of international relations, military conflict stuff I was looking at that time was more around ISIS. And so in turn, I don't remember the arguments about what to do with some of this territory and what we should do with Ukraine and who we should support. I remember those conversations happening. I just don't remember the substance, who acted and who didn't, all that stuff. One thing I just, Spartan unit. What do you think about the Nord Stream pipeline? Do you have any opinion on it? I like there's a podcast I listen to that's kind of news, current events ish. They end up, I think they might even label it politics, because they do a lot of talking about like domestic political races. But anyways, they had a comment that I kind of agree with, and they said, we may never know who is behind the Nord Stream pipeline bombing, because if the United States and NATO comes out and says we found definitive evidence that this was Russia, Russia's going to say, no, that was planted or whatever. If Russia says it is the United States, then we're going to say that's nonsense. It's hard to imagine a scenario where everybody agrees who did that is kind of where I stand. The closest thing I could say is that it does seem like it had to have been at least a state actor, just because to have 3 or 4 separate explosions rupture the pipeline in the matter of a couple of days, it's, that wasn't a scuba diver that went off course, but we'll see. Maxo, do you believe that it could be the United States? Yes, it always could be. I don't have a lot of confidence that our government can pull off secretive things for long. We're just not good at keeping secrets. And Americans, our society, we put things online. We like to brag. I mean, how many people leave office, leave their job in a special operations community or something, and they write a book, or they do an interview, or whatever it is. I find it, whenever you look at these really big, and I think this would fall into the category of, or maybe down the road it'll fall in the category of conspiracy. There's just too many wild cards involved, and we just don't keep secrets well at that level. So I would say unlikely that it's the United States, because it would look, that's the United States attacking one of our allies. So what that is. So I don't know. If it is the U.S., I think it's a big step up in that type of operation in a long, long time. Josh Riddle, appreciate it, man. Try to catch up on some of these comments here. Elon should shut off Starlink and teach the Ukrainians to be humble. Yes, they came after him pretty strong. I will say something that I disagreed with on all of that is some of his proposal that we just read here a second ago would give in to some of Russia's demands, right? Especially that Crimea is formally part of Russia. That's something they, excuse me. I don't think throwing some proposal out there makes him a Putin supporter or a Russian troll or anything like that. It's so hard to. I think it was a genuine attempt to try to get people talking about this stuff. And I'll tell you, it's tricky, man. I have mispronounced the name of. Sorry, I met the guy in his crazy BO. I hope you're talking about Musk and not me. But either way, it's just funny to read. I completely lost my train of thought. The challenge with this conflict is I have mispronounced words before, and that has directed people to say that I am, this or that. And it is like, I mispronounce like English words all the time. Right. So trying to pronounce some of these Ukrainian or Russian words that sometimes there's two for the same thing. And it's a minefield to walk through. And even with good intentions, you can accidentally say something that maybe shouldn't have been said, that could make it seem like you're supporting something that you're not. So Lucky Naya, are you paid to be pro-Ukraine? I'm not. We own a daycare here in Murfreesboro, and I have found that none of the kids care at all about Ukraine or Russia. Not at all. Not even a little bit. Jingle bells, Elon smells. Are you paid to be pro-Russian? Neither. No. If I am, those checks are getting lost. We did get a check in the mail, or not a check, a bill in the mail today for our daycare is $48,000 owed of taxes because there was a typo somewhere. They said we have over $5 million of property in our building. I can assure you it's not a fraction of that. It's a child care facility. We have carpet and books, but working on that now. Steven, appreciate the support, man. So Sweden said they found blast evidence. Do you think they'll release any information or evidence? Or I think they'll release the information. My understanding is the reason that hasn't moved forward is that it has not been safe to actually send people or machinery down there to really get into it. But I don't think there's any incentive. I don't know. There I go, being an optimist. I would like to hope that they release it. Of course, you've got the Hollywood scenario where they get ready to release it and then they get a visit from somebody from some country that says you can't release it or whatever, right? That's very homelandish. But I would like to think that they release the full thing, make it well known. I don't know how much it changes things right now, though. If it yeah, $5 million in Lego, that's right. We go through the Legos, dude. But like, if it was Russia, okay, the pipeline, something to keep in mind is the pipeline wasn't being used. So it's not like this shuts off an energy supply to Europe right now. It's going to, potentially impact in the future. But if Russia did it, I don't know that changes much of what's happening. If the United States did it, that's a whole diplomatic mess because it's attacking one of our allies. It's a whole nother bag of worms. It is very hard to unpack. I'm pro green men. Interesting. I don't think I've heard that before. Oh man, I'm not a kindergarten teacher. We have daycare, Kids Park Murfreesboro. My wife's in there now, and we got some awesome staff. I've found out that I like the business side of things. Love working with our employees. They're awesome. I don't have the patience to like work in childcare. It's a skill that not a lot of people have. We've hired some awesome people that it's just not, they just can't do it for very long. And we've got others where like, they love it. They absolutely love being around kids, reading the book 6 times over, because there's always a new kid showing up, wants to read it again. I can do that for like little periods of time. And I really like doing that with my daughter. But when it's like 15 kids just bouncing off the walls or something, I can only do that for short periods of time before I got to tap out. So I don't think I got kindergarten teacher in my future. Mike, does YouTube have an effect on your military career? It has impacted 0. So I do think this is something that's hard, maybe for folks that are not in the military to recognize that or to believe this maybe. I've never had anybody. So as a reservist, that is a part-time job for me. Once a month, a couple weeks a year kind of thing. I don't go into a lot of detail about what I do. It's not super secretive. I just don't, no reason to share that kind of stuff. It's not that cool, just for what it's worth. I try not to ever post in uniform, or I try to very infrequently post in uniform, I should say. If it's going to be anything contentious, 100% not. Also, I only wear the thing like 2 out of 30 days. So, I do try to make content every day, but what I'll do then is just get it ready ahead of time. So I'm posting while I'm still there, just not necessarily in uniform. I could post in uniform. I'm very concerned about giving the impression of speaking on behalf of the U.S. military or the Department of Defense. And the easiest way for me to not do that is to not have uniform on day to day. But to get back to the question, it hasn't had any impact at all. As the YouTube channel grows and the other socials grow, I always think like, how many people are probably in the military that are following this channel? And I'll go out and spend a week at Fort McCoy doing some work and run into like 1 or 2 people who have ever potentially come across this channel. So it's a big world. It's a big military. I've never had a supervisor say anything at all. And the threshold of things that I can say or get into is okay, Mike. So you're active reservist, and I'm coming back to that other question there, man. I did miss that. The threshold of things you can get into, I think, is larger than people expect. There's a lot of stuff we can talk about, especially on the reserve side, without putting the military career in any sort of jeopardy. My opinion. Probably some lines that can be crossed, but trying to stay away from those. Golden Gorilla, appreciate the support, man. That's awesome. These last few years have taught me to expect the unexpected. With that said, aliens, in your professional opinion, how will aliens affect the outcome of the Ukraine-Russia situation? I'm glad you asked this. The challenge that we face is the next actual alien visit isn't scheduled until 2024. So there was expectation that the war in Ukraine would end sometime in 2022. It looks like it'll bleed into 2023, but I don't think, at least how the schedules are lined up right now, and it's possible, possible the aliens get bumped left, but the way it sits right now is the war in Ukraine looks like it might end, or at least comes to some sort of peace deal before the next arrival of the aliens. So, crazy to say, but it doesn't look like they're actually going to have any impact at all. We'll have to see. Good question, though. Who says they're not already here? Yeah, I've listened to a couple the Joe Rogan podcasts where they go down that rabbit hole on aliens. It's awesome. Like, it's crazy stuff they get into. DA wants to know what you're cooking, Pierre. Oh, I missed that. Mike, appreciate it, man. Derek, nice of you to say, dude. Hayden Galloway, how do you feel about the U.S. military becoming woke and purging Trump supporters? I don't personally believe that either one of those things are happening. I think the military is, I've never seen anything about purging anyone based off politics, just for what it's worth. I also feel very lucky that a lot of we don't talk politics. Like, when I'm at the unit ever, like I don't think I've ever been in a unit where politics comes up like at all, whether it's soldiers or superiors. I know that that's just one person's experience, and it's a big military, but it's not often talked about. I don't get the feeling that it's woke. I know that can be a challenge because society is always changing, but our military is a snapshot of society, and because we've got all kinds, man. The military's got everything you can think of. Is one of them is in uniform, and that's kind of what the military looks like today. Which is, as society changes, the military will change. So I haven't seen anything that makes it woke or purging based off of politics. One man's opinion. I still like it. I think it's still full of a bunch of really good people. Iron Tiger USMC. Appreciate the support, man. That's awesome. Smurf hits. Do you think the atomic underwater bomb would make that big radioactive wave as it's rumored? I think so. I'd like to see some videos on that. So that's the Poseidon torpedo. That the torpedo wasn't missing. The sub that could carry it was missing. I think it's been spotted in the Arctic Sea. But either way, the Poseidon is this giant torpedo that is nuclear powered, so it can just go and go and go and go. And it supposedly can carry a nuclear warhead. You can put a nuclear warhead on almost anything. So fit a nuclear warhead on it. And the idea is that it attacks a coastal city and detonates off the coastal ways. And it can create like this radioactive tidal wave tsunami kind of thing. I don't know enough about, nuclear, I guess is what I'll say. It sounds like it could happen. If you've ever seen any of the nuclear tests that have been conducted out at sea, they kick up some pretty serious waves. I don't know. It checks the common sense box, I guess. But when you get into the details, I'd have to ask somebody more knowledgeable on nuclear than I. Torpedo nuke, yeah, total garbage. So it's homing and torpedo garbage. So this is a good one worth talking about. How do people come up with that idea? We've got anti-air defenses. We've got missile defenses, right? That's always the thought, always the consideration. How do we shoot down a nuclear missile, a missile of any kind. So, missiles get faster, missile defense gets better, so on. So it's this cat and mouse game. So one of the ideas, my understanding of why Russia went down this rabbit hole of creating this Poseidon superweapon is with all of the missile defenses being built up all around the world, this is one, because it's coming from a submarine that may or may not be tracked. It always has a strike back capability. So if the United States were to launch, say the United States were to launch a conventional attack, knock out all of Russia's nuclear capabilities in a day, a submarine under the surface with a nuclear torpedo still gives them the ability to strike an American city or a city in Europe. If it were to come out of the torpedo and launch like a missile, then it can be shot down with missile defense. But a stealth nuclear-powered torpedo that operates at significant depth and can go for a long, long time is very hard to track, very hard to identify, and very hard to destroy. So dead man switch kind of thing, kind of sort of in that realm. That's my understanding. I can hit one more here, and then I got to get moving, picking up my daughter in a little bit here. Elon's peace deal, we hit on that a little bit ago, man. I think it's good that they are talking about it. I think anything that gets the conversation going about peace is positive. I think he may be oversimplified. Look, to the majority of people, I'm looking at it right now, 2.7 million people voted. How many of those have never heard the term Crimea and don't know about annexed regions in Ukraine? All right. So there's probably a lot of people where that level of simplification probably did it for them. Like, okay, I can vote. But for anybody who's really been keeping up with conflict or aware of kind of the Russia-Ukraine history, that is an incredible oversimplification and kind of upset some people. But either way, I think if it starts a conversation, then it's a net positive. Jay-Z, appreciate the support, man. I'll hit this one, then I got to run out. Do you feel that missile defense even works, or is it just a big waste of time? I think it does work. It has the capabilities to work. It's crazy when you think about what that entails, actually shooting down, using essentially a shotgun or a missile to shoot down another missile mid-flight is wild. That's absolutely crazy. One-off, it does work. The challenge, I think, is always what happens if there's 50 missiles fired or start getting into some of these hypersonic missiles. How many of those could be stopped? So, it's not throwing golf balls at a chain link fence, right? Some of them are going to get through. Some of them are going to get stopped. I don't know what the percentage is, but it will do something, at least to the best of my understanding. Greg Johnson, appreciate the support, man. Marcus hopping in right at the last second. All right, everybody, I got to jump for now. We'll be back, I think, Tuesday. Having a buddy of mine come on. We'll talk Ukraine and NATO, and then we'll get back to just the stream like this later in the week. But hope you all have a good rest of the week, good weekend. We'll talk soon. See y'all.